try this, still having to do something with talk. But let me give you an example. I'll interrupt myself. One of many, but here. Now listen, I'm going to present the first part, the example. This is more or less something I lifted out of the ordinary world out there. But all sorts of examples like this everywhere. Syndicated or a network financial expert, like has his own daily little 2-minute spot or wherever they are on the radio or television, on the news. But let's say the radio. Next you're just sitting there and it comes on and he says, I'm so-and-so, and you know he's on constantly. There's his own little spot for the day. And he says the following, that you can definitely expect some increasing sluggishness in the retail economy, inasmuch as small businesses are having a growing difficulty in getting new venture expansion capital and loans from banks, particularly primarily based upon the savings and loan scandal, the failure of those many banks, based primarily on risky, questionable loans and investments they made. And he maybe says a few other words, but that is the point of that day's news item from this expert. What if you made it all up? But now, after having said that, now catch the rest of this now. We'll assume that you're fairly, as they call it, well-read, in this case, well-listened. Yeah. That you're aware of the fact that there is, just everywhere, a known entity, a thing known as the savings and loan scandal. You know all about it. So that's not in question. You hear that and your own connotative thinking can connect to all that, assuming you listen and use and read a little bit. The savings and loans, yeah, you know all about it. You know the figures being thrown around. It's going to cost us, the taxpayers, X amount of billions of dollars, and it grows up every time they get together and come out with new. Yeah, you know all that. You know all about the kinds of frauds, at least proclaimed frauds, where there has been individuals here and there in savings and loans and banks who made, to call them questionable loans, as charitable, with the kind of speculation and junk bonds and all kinds of putting their brother in some kind of new independent space business. So, when I say that, what if the guy made it up? It's not that he made up everything I repeated, everything I said. The savings and loan scandal in the 3D world is a reality. And for me to say that he made up the rest of it. Now wait a minute. Under all kinds of conditions, we could say that small businesses, everybody knows what a small business is. I didn't make up a small business. Small businesses exist. So to say that small businesses will be, no, are experiencing increasingly hard times in obtaining loans. Now when I say that he could have made that up, I want you to hear what I'm saying is what he did say. Everything in there has some reality, and it could be true. But what I want you to hear, of course I've already spilled the beans, those of you that may be able to hear around the curve. What if he was sitting there? This does not happen. Life is not wired up this way. But what if he was sitting there Monday morning, he had a hell of a weekend, hungover, just barely got in there, and he's got to do they start taping this, let's say in New York at 7 in the morning, so that they can get it out however they do it out to the local station, so that they can broadcast this anytime they want to during the day. But this is his Monday morning show, and there he sits at 6:45. He can hardly focus his eyes, and he's sitting there at the keyboard, and he's got to come up with something. Do you understand that? This doesn't work in life, because life is not wired up this way. But the man, you hear me, that this materially, sequentially, theoretically, could occur. there is no law of physics, no theory of psychology to belie the possibility that the guy could have sat there and thought, God almighty, what am I going to do? He tries to look down at the wire services, try to find out what's going on. There's been no real activity going on in Washington before 7 o'clock on Monday morning, so he got nowhere. I should have done something Friday. And suddenly, it just came to him, just about as fast as I could make it up, which I made up the little thing. He says, all right, I'm ready to go, and they turn on a tape recorder. And he says, small businesses in America are now already experiencing increasing difficulty in obtaining new venture financing and loans for expansion based upon this growing scandal. Perhaps he's even sitting there looking at from Friday some new figures. Some new congressman or another congressman is speculating there's even going to be another additional $1 billion that's going to cost, as they say, to bail out the savings and loans that are failing based upon risky loans. And so he's already looked at that, and he's just sitting there. And he was wired up to be able to do this. And so he's taping, and he says they're having increasing difficulty in obtaining loans and capital investment based upon this ever-widening savings and loan scandal, which, of course, was brought about, as we all know, by many, many questionable loans made to new businesses and for expansions in areas that were too risky to serve the clients of the banks properly in a judicious, reasonable manner. It all, in the real sense, makes sense. This could be true. You know, let us say that you were driving down or sitting at your office, you and many people, and you stopped just for a second to listen to this. Let's say that you're even in the brokerage business, or you're a small businessman, or you just consider the keeping up with the economy as part of being a up-to-date, sophisticated person, that you listen, and you even, as they say, kind of make a mental note. What if he did make it up out of desperation with a hangover? But you and many thousands, hundreds of thousands, may have listened to that and discuss it later around the water cooler about, You know, I should have suspected that. I think I heard somebody mention that last week, which you didn't. But it all sounds just right, and it strikes you that this could be of real significance. Also in there, he could throw in that this obviously is going to portend, will assure, let's say, a certain sluggishness, at least in the next couple of quarters, in the retail economy. He could say that, and you go, yeah. And that might belie the fact that Friday, or maybe this morning's paper, somebody got an early interview with somebody on the Federal Reserve Board that maybe just an hour earlier was pointing out figures showing that the economy is blossoming on the retail level. And you may have even read that an hour ago. And now this guy says, and of course the difficulties of small business, new business, and already going small businesses, either to get venture capital to get the business going or to expand in a way that would increase production and contribute to the overall economy, is going to be more and more difficult for small businesses based upon, the savings and loan scandal, and so this certainly is going to show. It's already, we can feel the effects. You go, which you don't know. He's just making it up. We can already feel the effects of this kind of adverse drag on the economy, so there's going to, without any doubt, be a specific sluggishness in the economy, at least in the retail market, on the retail level. And he says, until tomorrow, this is so-and-so, with money talk. You might, for a second, go, well, of course it could be worse. I mean, this is a passing thing. We're all going to have to bail out the savings and loan, but one thing about it, at least it shows that the regulatory agencies, they're going to tighten up, they're going to get their act together better, and so I guess we'll all learn from our lessons. It's going to cost us a little bit, but at least it's not like a depression. Well, back to work. All right. Now, we're not laughing, and I'm not saying that this has any long-range effect on you personally. It's only people really tied up with the secondary levels of ordinary life that do believe that such as that has a real impression, as I've tried to get you to see before. They're the kinds that might want to rush out on the basis of that and move their big financial nest egg, from a money market over to some CD, they're $1,750 so that this year they might make 30 cents more. It's just a hobby. But what I want you to see is that very story, the scenario I made up, could then be picked up. The wire services, somebody later in the day might repeat what he said because he is a recognized, some sort of an authority. He may even have a PhD, but he has come up through the ranks, let us say, one of the networks. He did a lot of reporting. He worked over at the Federal Reserve. He was the desk man there in Washington for economic affairs with NBC or somebody for 5 years. Then he kind of struck off on his own and started this syndicated thing, or maybe the network even sponsored it for him, got him going. And now he is recognized. The man has been around the block in this kind of affairs. And so it could spread out for that day or maybe several days. But when I say he made it up, some of you laughed, and I guess people that wasn't familiar with what's going on here, it all sounds real simple, or it either sounds too simple, or, what's the point? The point is beyond any simplistic pointing out, because I even noted for you that, in a sense, this could not happen. Such things do not happen. And if indeed they do happen, they are just a passing pimple. It has no effect. But it does not normally happen. A person does not, in some way, intellectually and willfully, conceive of such as this. That's not the way life's arranged. But what I want you to see is it could happen. There is nothing. There are no rules anywhere in any book you've ever seen on this planet that says that that could not happen. And so if it did happen, and the guy made up this story that you may have listened to, maybe you and some other people in the office, let us say that you are in a brokerage firm, and when he comes on, you guys maybe even turn down everything going on, and everybody stops for 2 minutes to listen. It's not always worthwhile, but my God, sometimes you pick up something. And so you listen to that, and some of you look at each other and go, and people make notes. And he made it up. He just sat there and made it up almost as fast as he could talk, just based upon years of being around this, and he just kind of opened his mouth the way politicians can do, preachers can do. The good down home ones just start talking, and it just seems to come out. Let's say he did that. Then I'm back to asking you, so what? But see, that's not a smart-ass comment. That's not even a smart-ass rhetorical question. You ought to think about it. It could have what would appear to be, at the same level that such things operate anyway, that this thing, this show today, that he made up, has a rippling effect to some degree. That it could be true. In fact, it may be true. But he made it up to say this is already happening. Does it give you any further encouragement to consider that talk does not necessarily convey, or is limited to the conveyance of information, be it good, bad, indifferent, questionable, reliable? How about my suggestion that talk may be primarily for the sake of preparing people for additional talk? So that the question about, well, wait, what if somebody did, what if they're making up the news? Because I didn't go that far, but what if somebody's sitting around in New York and they just sit around and they make up the news? Especially out-of-town news. That is, that you are a big shot and you, let's say, live outside the general New York area, and let us say that you subscribe, by airmail even, to the New York Times, not to fool around. So here you are, in Armpit, Georgia, or Toe Jam, California, and you get it by 9 o'clock every morning, the New York Times, or it could be the London Times. And it's got stories in there. What's going on in the London markets? What's going on now in the continuing political turmoil, Czechoslovakia, Hungary? What if there are a bunch of guys sitting around a table every morning in New York and they just make up this? They just got to fill up the damn paper to sell advertising. What if they do? I mean, what if that happened and you went, oh my goodness, what's happened to life? What damage has been done to you? What damage has been done to everybody? At first you'd want to say, well, it just means that life is kind of a joke. Now, I didn't say that. You said that. I didn't say that. I was speaking for you because I know how earth people talk sometimes and think. And you would think, well, that's not fair. In a real serious sense, that's not fair. Of course, you probably kind of would say, wait a minute, life may not be fair. See, now, I didn't say that either. I want this on the record. We got this on tape. I didn't say either one of those things. You people said that. What difference would it make? But contrarily, may I point out to you, what if hardly anything happens of any great consequence, anything real interesting in the world? Of course, look at your own life. How interesting is it? Because that's one of the reasons to read the news, because you think, boy, I don't want to be shot or anything, but look at the excitement that was going on around Christmas in Prague. And around Christmas, I sing around listening to Elvis sing Blue Christmas over and over and over, and drinking cheap wine. And hoping at least Santa Claus might bring me a stocking full of sticks or twigs. But boy, at least they were having excitement. That's one of the things to think about. What if they were all sitting around? There wasn't all these crowds in Wenceslas Square. All the checks were sitting home going, Jesus, boy, is this boring. So what if that happened? Then would you see, for you to say originally, well, it's unfair if people are sitting around making up the news and it doesn't actually happen. Contraire, the way life is arranged right now, if that were true, that there's a group of people making up most of the news, and most of it doesn't happen. Some of it happens, but most of it doesn't. All right, what if that were true, and somebody jumped up, like you, or no, let's say some ordinary person who's real dumb, and jumped up and spilled the beans and exposed all this so that all the papers and all the news media had to stop. Do you realize that would wreck life? And then you can say, yeah, but now things are only up and up. At least we're not getting this phony news. That's right. You wouldn't be getting anything. You'd probably be back in the dark ages. You have to follow all that. I'm not going to stop and clean all this up and pick up all the pieces for you. But it's a fact. The news, even if it was made up, which I'm certainly not saying it is, but if the news was absolutely made up, it is now an indispensable part. Not good or bad. It doesn't matter whether you are wired up. If you're an ordinary person, you had some sort of imagined complaint over the spin they put on the news, or the New York Times is too leftist. Or that if you thought that some other paper, the Manchester Guardian, was too much of an old Whig. Now, that doesn't matter. It is necessary that there be a thing called the news. There's necessary that there be a thing called the blank. Fill it in, whatever it is. You know, take something you really don't like. Mustard gas, income tax, broccoli. There's got to be, if it's going, it's got to be there, and it's serving some purpose. The news could be made up, and I ask you again, this is a very non-hostile, and it's a very expansive question for me to say, so what? What difference would it make? What if it was made up? And what if people, to take my example, that some people in positions that had some effect on other people's affairs, which is to say nothing because everything is connected, but if we say that people that were apparently, to jump in again, and medias res, and say we jumped in this middle here of this brokerage firm, and after the show gets off that this guy made up, they jump on the phone to their clients and begin to say, hey, small business is taking a real big, and they start calling their clients that are small businessmen that's got money invested, and they start calling up, giving them new advice about we should shift around some of your funds and your investments. And it's based upon the fact that this guy with a hangover, desperate for a thing, made it up. Now you might say, if you're ordinary, you might say, well, boy, that could lead to real trouble. Really? How much more trouble than if a broker, by the way, sit there and every morning he flips a coin, heads or tails, to call it and advise everybody from A to Z or from A to L on his list of clients. If it comes up heads, he calls up and he says, the news is not out yet, but there's some talk already. You know, I have my sources in Washington that the Federal Reserve has some figures that will be coming out later this week. That I don't have all the details, but I did hear enough that my advice is, I think you should be selling off and maybe getting and moving. And by the way, I didn't make that up, but the point is the way that life is primed and wired up, that everything is serious. Of course, in a serious sense. That things are serious, then all of this cannot be true. It's just silly. It's, you know, if I pushed it too far enough and I had some sort of public forum and I was dumb enough to really try to push it, it would make people very upset, as you should know. Very upset, except for outside the mainstream, the bell curve of life. I'm aware of the fact that there's some that are immediately looking for those kinds of three-dimensional collusions that would go, yeah, hey, boy, you know, hey, they'd want me or whoever did such as that, hey, start a new political party, start something, we're with you, we knew all that. But we're talking about real fringe, way outside, not just the bell curve, but almost off the graph paper. So, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the way life is wired up in the middle of its circulatory system through man. If for some reason I tried to push that, people would be very upset. They wouldn't really know why. It has to do with the way energy goes, but if they had to explain it, or if I went ahead and tried to explain it for a second for them, their kind of reaction in what would seem to be psychological terms, it would be kind of a gross unfairness. Stronger than that. It's beginning to shake the foundations of cultural reality, human reality. That if we cannot depend, I know there are crooks here and there and people that pull con games, but if it gets into large institutionalized situations, then what I'm describing, remember I'm speaking now for the ordinary humanity, intelligence, they would be saying, well, if that kind of thing could go on, then you would then have Harvard Medical School come out with a paper or a statement that they're on the verge of being able to cure such and such disease, or they're having great success in doing so and so, and then we find out it was just some guy up there that had swore in the last couple of months that he had some breakthrough that he was working on, and he got hung over, and it got there Monday, and they really put the screws on him, and he said that. An individual's intelligence, the bell curve of humanity, the middle class of humanity in the full sense of the word, everything is wired in such a way that there is a kind of reliable justice to it. There's a reliability to the networks, not, and they can't keep track of everybody, but the justice of it, the way it's wired up, is that there is not an individual that will end up in a position of having a network or even a syndicated show carried all across this country speaking on any subject, finances, law, psychology. Things are simply not arranged that such a person would end up there. Now, you know that there's got to be these kind of guys that are on or in those kind of positions that seem to have some media influence. And you know that they've got to show up sometimes with a hangover. They've got to show up sometimes probably just barely zipping up their pants and wondering, Jesus, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to write about? You know that happens. But you should also, some of you are already reacting that you're hearing what I'm saying, things are arranged in such a way that the people who end up there, even if they show up late, show up with a hangover, they are not the kind of people, even if it was possible, to do what I said. I'll put it to you crudely, it never crossed their mind. Well, you should know that. That's just the way life is. If there was somebody around here and there that was capable of doing such a nefarious deed, they would never get in a position to be able to do it. That's the whole thing. That's what strikes me, people, as inexplicable little blips on the screen of history that somebody does seem, in retrospect, that they got in a place that they shouldn't have been there. They were able to pull off something there for a little while that they shouldn't have been able to do. And that is looked at as being black marks on the history and the march of human civilization. And in a sense it is. It is, of course, a kind of anomaly, because from one view, this is not the point, but from one view you could look at great apparently human-produced calamities such as major wars and conflicts. You could look at that as being an anomaly. It's not really. Not in a more complex sense, but what I'm saying is that is what strikes people that, wait a minute, it's all right for people to punch each other here and there, for countries to threaten each other and to boycott each other and to send up tariffs and try to break each other economically, or maybe come over there and step over their border, maybe pissing their roses or something. But when it starts that they're trying to just wipe out, one country jumps on another one, that they tend to go throughout the ages, all the way from Rome and the Huns up until today is a thing of, wait a minute. That was not the point of what I was pointing out, but there is, I wanted you to try and some of you to see that there is a gradation, that it seems to be worse, it seems to be better, but it is not possible for ordinary humans to conceive of somebody doing an act that would be breaking at the fabric of reality and to knowingly do it, such as the guy make up that show when he has a position of some respect, if not influence. People just, they can't even think of it. They can sit there and listen and go, he's wrong. No. I mean, that savings and loan thing, that's not going to have that much effect. My brother's in the banking business. Or it might be some people listening to it that's in the banking business. And go, that's not true. Or they might go, well, we haven't cut down on loans. But then they might go, huh? Am I the last to know? Should we be checking what some of our, hey, tells the secretary, get my friends out there in Seattle. Let me check and see what's going on out there. It simply does not cross anybody's mind, unquote, that kind of playing with in a dangerous, frightening way of people playing with reality does not occur. No one even thinks about it. And they're safe not thinking about it because it doesn't happen. And the reason I brought up certain kinds of war and activity is that's the closest. And people don't know what to do then except rail about it and shake their fists and holler, well, it's just insanity swept some group of people. You know, the Huns they just had to be, of course, by all history that's left of the Huns, they were just treated as people still now do in modern warfare. They were treated historically and at the time as less than human. Ah, yeah, they look human, but Jesus, nobody could act like that. Nobody could treat us the way those Huns have treated us and actually be human. You know, they come from somewhere else. They've been mating with polar bears or something. We don't know what they are, but these people are less than human, which is one way to explain, which is part of the purpose in evil in life. The concept of evil is that the fabric of reality is getting real close. It's not been rent yet. It hadn't been ripped, because if it gets ripped, you get ripped. That is, normally the individual goes nutso. He quits playing. Life he kind of becomes a broken plate in their white cell, and he's on the way out. He's out of the game. He's been bruised too bad. But the feeling is there has to be some kind of explanation, and there is none. And the idea of evil, the idea of somebody being less than human, is a relatively acceptable explanation for that which life presents no real satisfying first story. It's just, well, somebody was insane, somebody was demon-possessed, or those people are not actually human. We don't know where they came from. They just came riding down the steps there. And there they were. We said, who are you? And boy, I wish we'd never heard of them. Turned out to be the Huns. Turned out they weren't even human. There's your explanation. But that is a kind of small relative attempt when dealing with an area that is getting close to putting an extreme strain on the fabric of reality as it was conceived of at any particular time. But at the time, if it actually happened, which it wouldn't, but if it actually happened, people could not really accept it. The human intellect is not wired up for somebody to say, do you realize that last night Dan Rather or somebody got on the news, and it turns out the man's been licking some kind of weird frog or something, and that he sat there in the first 5 minutes before the first commercial, before they called him, the man sat there, and we don't know how, he was in some kind of trance. You remember all those stories last night? Well, yeah, I did notice. He made up that first 5 minutes of the network news live. He just made it up. None of it happened. That will not play in Sheboygan. That is, that will not play on planet Earth. It's inconceivable. It's beyond any notion of evil. It's beyond any notion, an idea of insanity. You just cannot do that. That is not part of the wiring system. But I ask you again before I press on, do you see why I brought it up, that you hear me, that it could happen? I said it. If I was sitting there, I could do it. And under the right conditions, there are people who could do it. Just make it up, just kind of just clutching at everything going on in the economy right now, and you say something, and he might say it. He might have made this up, and 2 hours later somebody come up and said, do you realize the feds just came out and they got figures showing, I didn't even thought about what you said this morning on the first airing of your morning, your show today, yeah. The figures the feds got probably surprised you. It may be worse than you put it. And he looks, God damn, I was right. That doesn't matter. That's what I'm telling you. That doesn't matter. But then I ask you my original question, if he did make it up. And I said, so what? My insinuation is, that doesn't matter. If life did arrange such a thing, life would be able to use it. Or else, as I said, it'd just be a passing bruise, and it'd be right through life's system like pork through a duck, and that'd be the end of it. See if you can see why should I pick on animals? Run right through them like ethics to an attorney. Humility and a doctor. Culture through a bricklayer. This is connected, this kind of subversive analysis, just right at the very heart of the secondary world. I at times refrain, I don't know why, from, well, I do know why, it was a figure of speech, okay? But I refrain from just trying to paint some absolute portrait that there is a kind of reality going on that is, in fact, just a stage flat, that is a Potemkin village, that is just a floating illusion. But relatively speaking, the secondary life of man from one view, but you've got to be able to get outside the Earth's gravity. You've got to get outside the ordinary view to see this. You can't just say, yeah, because you don't like it. But what seems to be, what I've been calling the secondary life of man, everything that would seem to be the civilized, sophisticated, intellectually based, artistically based, culturally based life of man outside of just procreation, keeping the race going, keeping yourself alive, individually, protecting your family, just the basic, rudimentary efforts to keep oneself alive and to keep the race going. Then everything outside that, you know, I've been sort of referring to as secondary activities. All secondary activities you could look at as being a floating illusion. But it's a necessary illusion. Illusion is not the word because there is no word. And it's not an attack on it. You couldn't live without it anymore is what I'm saying. You couldn't live if all the people who are doing these shows in the news, if it turned out that they'd been making it all up and they got caught and they said, well, we'll quit. Of course, I'm really pushing it now. They couldn't quit. We'd all have to write and say, no, don't quit. Yeah, we were mad for a minute. But, you know, damn, don't quit, because if they quit, we'd be in bad shape. Trust me. You might still be able to eat, and you might still be able to, you know, get in a sleeping bag, and you still might keep warm, but life would begin to crumble on this planet. And so even if they were found out, and we all got kind of peaked for a second, and they all hung their head, we'd have to say, well, wait a minute, until we get this straightened out, go back to the papers and get the shows on the air, because we're going to have to go away and think about this. Then we'd go away and we'd all forget about it. Or we wouldn't know what to do with this information if it came out that they've been making up the news as long as we know about it. It's been a secret. We don't know how we didn't know about it, but it's a fact, and now they admit it. And everybody gets real mad and upset and screams. Maybe several people try to OD over prune juice or something. But after a few hours, and people wander off and they think about it, what are they going to do with the information? All right, I was going to pull out another fairly common thing I do not have to make up that goes on, that you have never had occasion to look at in a certain way. And one of the, I can think of several examples, but one of the great ones, I'll start with a religious one. Everybody's heard this quote. You don't have to hold your hand, but some of you may have nodded along long before you got involved with this. They're ruining Christmas by their crass commercial acts. Just ruining it. We could say they're ruining Mother's Day by the same kind of commercialism. Or we could say they're ruining Valentine's Day, that used to mean something, but now it's just... So, you follow me. And there is a reality to that. But there is a greater reality also, as always. Everybody knows what that means. That is that comment that life makes one part of its body through men say regarding other parts of its body. That they're running, let's say Christmas again, they're running Christmas by the crass commercialism now inherent, now in place. You know, that started out to be something decent. It was supposed to be about brotherhood and peace and love. And now it's nothing but bye. Go in credit. They have just ruined it. All right. Our Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Uncle's Day. Are you ready? Do you understand that let's take what they say, the commercial acts and activities that are ruining it. We all know what they are. So let's just take their statement. Without those acts, let's take Christmas, without the crass, uncharitable, commercial, despicable acts that are running Christmas, without those acts, there wouldn't be a Christmas. It's not possible. I guess I won't be able to stop there, will I? Based upon this plethora of silence. In the world of secondary activities, you will always have, if a thing has any lifespan, enough to fall within the critical eye of man. In other words, if it lasts long enough that it becomes part of your vocabulary, whatever it is, whether it be Christmas, whether it be economics being the hot new topic of the 90s, whatever it is. If anything has a lifespan enough to get into the vocabulary of the middle class, any lifespan, then it will be misused. I'm using their terms. It will be mistreated because that is an integral part of the thing, of the activity. So not arguing their words, let us say the whole concept, the idea of a Christmas or a Mother's Day. A Christmas being something to do with transcendental love, religious ideas, or Mother's Day having to do with the closeness, the genetic closeness, the maternal love between children and their mother, or Valentine's, sex itself, the very force that keeps the race going, that they have taken something as beautiful as brotherhood, if it was Christmas, or maternal affection, if it was Mother's Day, or sex, well, they call it love, of course, on Valentine's Day. But they have done acts, they have done these acts over and over and over that has mistreated, has misused the whole concept. In other words, they have ruined it. Right. We're not arguing with that, with their terms, except for this. What they are describing, what they are pointing at, that everybody can see, the crass commercialism. This so-called misuse, this mistreatment of the original concept is an integral, inescapable part of the activity. Nothing can survive long enough to have a noticeable life of its own, to fall into human awareness, without it, by some segment, a sizable segment of some part of life's body, via man, very shortly, saying, my God, words to this effect, what a beautiful concept and idea this was. And now we're running it. We have mistreated the whole idea. If that does not happen, then whatever the thing is, whatever the activity is about to expire. And you won't even notice that. It will just be. It'll be just a little debris that comes in with the tide and goes out. Nobody particularly notices. But the idea of something being misused, misconstrued, bastardized, or to go back and quote my original one, ruined. They're just ruining Christmas. If there is not this feeling that this thing, a religious concept, a moral idea, a new political, a social movement that starts off and no reasonable person could be against it, that this is a reasonable, charitable, decent, good thing to do. If it's going to last any length of time, enough for whatever the name of it is, whatever the idea is, to fall into the vocabulary of the average person, then about that same time, if not by next week, next month, there are going to be groups of people saying, they're running it. They are absolutely running it. Through bureaucracy, through commercialism, through factions, now beginning to fight over the original concept. There's no longer a charitable movement. Now it's two groups fighting for control of the charity, and now they're spending most of their money in lawsuits. It's everywhere. And of course, if you're ordinary, even if you're not a professional critic, if you're ordinary, you are, as you all know, a freelance critic. And if you're ordinary, you hear such as that and you go, my, is that the name of life or what? I'm just overcome. Boy, I'm glad I live, at least in this day, to where there's good access to the news. I'm just thinking, if I live back in the 1400s, this kind of stuff still went on, albeit on a smaller scale perhaps, but the bureaucracies and the courts around the kings. This same kind of stuff was going on, and in the churches. But at least, thank God, now we got the papers, we got the network news, that we can know about this kind of stuff. Unless, of course, they're just making it all up, which it doesn't matter anyway. But you're thankful now that I have got this continuing access to the never-ending string of bad news of how everything is being mismanaged, abused. The thing, the process, the activity absolutely could not exist. And so we're not belying. All of you should be getting this good by now. It's not seeing something new by comparison. It's not saying, well, they're wrong. They're not ruining Christmas. If they say they're running Christmas, by God, they're running Christmas. Who are you to say they're not? Bunch of snot-nosed kids. If people better than us said they're running Christmas, and I'm not here to tell you they're not. I didn't say they're not. They're running Christmas. Right. So we don't agree, we don't disagree. If they say that, then it's a fact locally somewhere. They're running Christmas. But then what you got to see is, what they're calling running Christmas, if we could change it mathematically, and you could drop all that and turn it into an equation, which you could, but instead of running Christmas, or make it musical, it's do-do-do-do. All right. Then they say, somebody, a group says, do-do-do-do, and you go, all right, I can hear it. I didn't say I like it. I didn't say I didn't like it. They may have stole it. It may remind me of something else. I'm not saying anything except this, which you're not wired up to say, or to hear, or to think. What they just said is not a matter of right or wrong, or whether I agree or disagree, which if I did would all be a local phenomenon. It'd be responding to one knock at the door. But what they're saying, that the do-do-do, that is simply a part of the theme. If you took that away, then let us say it's the full song, Christmas, went do-do-do-do-do-do. Then if you take away where they're running it, that was the part that went do-do-do, and you took out that, then all that's left would be do-do-do. And that's not Christmas. Now you might say it is, but if somebody could come in and take away all the ways that they're running it and abusing something, and they took it away, now I say, all right, take it, maestro, and they played it then, you'd go, what happened? You'd say, that's not Christmas. What is this, a joke? I said, well, wait a minute. Put back in the rest of it. They go, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. You go, yeah, that's Christmas. And I'd have to wait a second. 1, 2. And you'd say, that's Christmas, but they're still running it. Do you? Well, in other words, Christmas, to many people is now, they're running Christmas. That's Christmas. That's one important aspect of Christmas. They have ruined the church since they've replaced the common prayer book. They have ruined the church since they started doing Mass in English. Whatever it is, they have ruined the Republican Party since they let women into the Republican Party. It's just never been the same. That's it. But a local person say, well, that's not it. I'm expressing a critical, and I may say I'm not alone in this, observation on what's wrong. And if I was silly enough to play along with this game, I'd go, right. And you go, no, you don't understand. I'm saying that things are not correct now, that the Republican Party now, well, it's ruined. And I go, right. That is now, locally, as far as you, and you said you're not alone, right? And you went, right. You saw me before, go, right. And I go, I saw that. So you're not alone. So to more than one person, this is now it. Of course, ordinary time, so you don't understand. Which, of course, is just the problem. You could look at it if you can see it in a certain way. That those of you who can recall that all secondary activities, what humans do, can always be traced back to what I was calling for the time being the primary affairs that keep life minimally alive: sex and food and shelter. You can see all secondary activities, such as the art of dining, the hobby of being a gourmet, is simply a secondary variation of eating. That is, eating just to stay alive. Love, romance, and all sorts of other things you can see is a secondary variation of sex. Just blind sex. Retting, as they call it in the halls of, not Ivy, but, well, she moved anyway. But you can see all secondary activities. You can see sports as a secondary reflection of hunting, gathering food, the combat, not for the sake of territory necessary, but the original combat of fighting over who will survive, who will get the prize. And instead of it being the Stanley Cup now, or being the Stanley Cup now, at one time it would have been they're fighting over that dinosaur. If humans had lived at the same time with dinosaurs, don't anybody write me with that? That seems to be the new trick question all kids are trying to pull on adults now if you hadn't fallen for it. Is how did the humans protect themselves, even back then, from the dinosaurs? And you claim to have a high school education, some of you, and you're supposed to say, well, kid, and you answer it, and then they go, ha, ha, ha. Humans were not contemporaries with dinosaurs, so don't write me, you people that do have a high school education, and try to make me look bad. It's bad enough as it is. I would have finished if I'd had, well, at any rate. What I was going to say, you can not only see all secondary activities, all human affairs, all cultural, all singularly humane mortal activities as being a kind of elaboration, a kind of expansion, a variation of some primary activity. Only about 3 of them, everything. After that, all hobbies are simply a smaller variation, an expanded, a looser, a less pressing variation of just the basic primary elements to keep the race alive. All right. But there's another way you could also look, that in a sense, to get back to the ruining Christmas, you can also see the kind of secondary activities as almost a local, now this is very relative, it's not true three-dimensionally, but almost as though it were an attack, an attempt to destroy the primary activity on which it is based. Now, well, at least I got a couple. That's why their running Christmas has got to be a part of Christmas. All right, does not, well listen, does not, and it's not a three-dimensional criticism for any of you people on tape, so don't fall for that. Does not becoming a gourmet, is that almost not an attack on eating? Well, what if you were so caught up with being a gourmet? Do you understand this is possible? That you could begin to harm your health, that you would only eat, look, whatever I know I'm behind the times, but if it was California nouveau cuisine was still hot, and you were so hip, you were such a secondary, decent, sophisticated person, that you're out on a trip. You're riding with somebody, you're trying to get home, that your grandmother's sick, and your car broke down, and you hitchhike, and you're in an 18-wheeler, and the only place the guy will stop to eat is truck stops, and all they got is greasy hamburgers. Do you follow? We'll assume that you'd be sane enough for this not to happen, but push far enough, it could have an adverse effect on your health. While you saying otherwise, you could say, the guy keeps saying, look, it's got another 20 hours before we get to where you're going, and you better eat something, kid, you look hungry. And you think, well, I can't eat that kind of stuff. And we're not discussing the relative merits of a greasy hamburger, but a person could begin to be affected adversely down at the primary level based upon the pursuit of a secondary activity based upon what I'm saying could be that which was harming you. Did that get too convoluted? Let me go back and repeat what I told you the first time. In a certain way, you could see secondary activities as being an attack, almost an attempted, very gradual and low level, but an attempt to almost destroy the primary activity on which it is based. Well, does not love almost try and eradicate, do away with blind sex? Hallmark does not put out cards for Valentine's Day that says, that has a nice big pretty heart and little cherub, and it says, hey mama, let's, The whole point of love is almost, of course I know it's not literally, because people in love, I hear reports that they do engage in cohabitation of a carnal sort. But do you hear, it is almost a kind of low-level attack on the primary, that love. All the romantic poets, they do not write about, boom, 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 boom in a cheap motel room. It's about moonlight and about how I remember the aroma of your hair when it was wet. That is, the hair on your head. That the whole idea of love and romance is like a low-level attack on the primary activity on which it is based. Okay. I went through all that. Can you see now even a wider connection? Is it clear to some of you? I think I am now asking foolishly to say that, hey, they're running Christmas. It's not matter whether that's true or false. They say they are. Whoever said that is true. But do you see that that's part of it? But it's not for them to say they're running it. And of course, you should understand it's in your own nervous system how they could say that. And a part of your own ancestral DNA can go, yeah, I know. Yeah, I felt that. I've agreed with that. But the so-called running of it is like an attack to expand it. It's an integral part, to say the least. It's when I started out, but I want you to try and see it's even can be more than that. It is a growing, it is a healthy process that from some views that the thing's falling apart. That the original idea of Christmas or Hanukkah or anything that you can say the original idea was humane. The original idea had this purpose, to honor motherhood, whatever. Something that everybody go, my, how nice. The thing then has to be, if it's going to live, it then has to take on what appears to be characteristics of even itself. That's not the way it seems, but itself then begins to attack itself. That the whole idea begins to get misused. That the church says, we love you people. And to show it, all of you people who are not part of us, we're going to kill you this afternoon. That's how much we love you. History is full, life is full of popping up critics here and there. They refer to that as, they call it irony. I was going to say stupidity for some of you. Now that you can begin to see the correlation. But it's not irony. It's not insanity. A church, any church, killing people for the sake of loving them, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I don't be there, and I'm not telling you to go pull the switch and help shoot all the heathens or those not belonging to some religion. But do you hear? That's the same thing as they're ruining Christmas. Right. That's part of it. All secondary activities from a certain view are encroaching on, making at least low-level attacks on the primary activity on which it is based. Put it to you another way. The contract out on everybody is generally given to your best friend. Few minutes we got. Let me try just a little bit more if you can go off in a slightly more complex orbit, just a little bit away from what I'm talking about now. The kinds of picturizations I've also used in the past of describing knowing to you in the three-dimensional world, it takes 3 dimensions for anything to happen. Using just the term dimension, of course, height, breadth, and depth. And used another way when it seems to be active forces. In the past I referred to it as C force, D force, and E force, and even pointed out that after having named them that just arbitrarily, capriciously, that it just so happens that you could look at, relatively speaking, for the kind of dance, the C force we could say could stand, relatively speaking, for constructive as opposed to D would appear to be destructive, and then the E force appears to be, for those that can even get a grasp of it, the irrelevant force. That whatever dance is going on between C and D that your ancestors always wanted to call good and evil, true and false, there's also something that's never inside the fight. It changes, the whole scenario changes, and that was the E force. But back to this. If we were backing up for a second and using relatively speaking, metaphorically speaking, and I said that the C force and the D force at any given instance would seem to be the ones engaged in an Apache dance, pushing each other around, and the C force did stand for constructive. Another more complex way to look at it is not that D-force would then be the actual opposite, that is destructive, but you could look at D-force. Remember, we still consider C-force constructive. By ordinary views, and even you right now, if you can see it for a second, go ahead and follow the ordinary view. C-force is Mother's Day, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, humanism, decency, honor, justice, all the good stuff is C-force. And then the D-force, of course, would be evil, the ruining of Christmas, the commercialization of Hanukkah. Everything is D-force, right? A more complex view from right outside the planet where this kind of stuff originates, rather than seeing D-force as being destructive vis-a-vis C-force, consider this. More like a kind of melancholy over the inevitable deterioration and ultimate passing of that particular C-force. They're almost ruining C-force. The one I'm looking at. But it's not a destruction. Sometimes it appears to be. But can you hear there's a more complex... I'm trying to expand you getting into the energy of it rather than just the words. It can be seen and it can be even felt, the energy part. There's not always a destruction. It's not that blatant that somebody's out there saying, down with Christmas. Or if we're going to celebrate Christmas, what we should do, instead of giving each other presents, we should give each other hand grenades with a pin pulled. It doesn't have to be that. That's not the ruining of Christmas. And that's not the feeling always that, well, there's evil in the world. A more subtle, which is a more manifold feel of it, is you could look at D, that is whatever that force that seems to be pushing and pulling and dancing with, some force that seems to be trying to do good by most people's wired up opinion, that then that which is resisting it is not necessarily resistance, it's not necessarily a direct attack on it. Kind of like a melancholy. Well, many of you have experienced it without knowing it. You're not mad. You're not really attacking what's going on. It's not a routine sadness like, oh, they're ruining Christmas. It's not that. It's the inevitability of everything changing. Unless, of course, you're ordinary, and then you can about hold it down to where not enough changes in 70 years to really upset you. Of course, you're trying to do this, you got to ignore everything I said about there being no opposites in this world. If you're trying to do this, you've got to take an opposite approach. By God, something better upset me. Well, we're out of time. Tune in tomorrow for my next daily show, where we'll be speaking on the increasing ease by which small businesses may obtain loans